The champagne flutes sparkled. Soft classical music floated through the air like a promise no one truly believed in. White orchids hung from golden arches, a string quartet played near the marble fountain, and waiters in tuxedos glided between silk-draped tables carrying trays of foie gras and truffle canapes. It was the kind of wedding people whispered about for weeks. A billionaire groom, a mysterious bride. No love story, no fairy tale, just signatures on paper and an exchange of vows that meant far more to the lawyers than the couple standing beneath the chandelier. Juliet stood at the center of it all in a stunning satin gown that hugged her figure like it had been designed for her alone. And maybe it had. Nothing about this event was second-hand. Not the dress, not the 4-carat diamond on her finger, not the man she had just said "I do" to. She looked over at Adrian Sterling. He was everything the tabloids promised. Tall, controlled, jaw carved like marble. His tuxedo was flawless, his expression unreadable. His hand barely brushed hers during the ceremony. He hadn't smiled once, but that was part of the deal. Juliet didn't expect smiles. She expected security. She expected silence. She expected the kind of calculated arrangement where both parties knew better than to dream of love, because this wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction, a marriage that would last 1 year. 1 year of appearances. 1 year of dinners and events and staged perfection. 1 year in exchange for enough money to wipe out her father's debts, cover her sister's medical bills, and give her the kind of freedom she never thought she'd taste. She had rehearsed this. She had prepared herself. No emotions, no illusions, no regrets. So why did her stomach twist when she caught Adrian's eyes as the photographer shouted for one more shot? He didn't look at her like a husband, not even like a stranger. He looked at her like a burden, a risk, an unpredictable variable in a life built on control. And maybe that was fair. After all, she was the one who had agreed to sell her freedom. She was the one who had stepped into his world of private jets and tailored power with nothing but a suitcase and a contract. Juliet felt the weight of the ring on her finger. It was heavy. Later that evening, after the speeches and toasts, after the final waltz and the final smile for the cameras, they returned to his penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling glass, views that swallowed the skyline, silence that pressed in from every side. He poured himself a drink and didn't offer her one. "You don't have to pretend anymore," he said, not looking at her. "I wasn't pretending," she replied softly. He turned to her. "You expect me to believe that?" "I didn't say you had to believe anything." He studied her for a long moment. Then, with a dismissive shrug, he walked down the hall and into his room, closing the door behind him without a word. Juliet stood there, alone in her wedding dress, in a space that looked like a palace but felt like a prison. This wasn't the end of her life. It was just the beginning, and yet, for the first time since she signed that contract, she wondered what it would cost her in the end. Not in money, but in something she hadn't even realized she still had. Her heart. Before the dress, before the ring, before the contract that turned her life upside down, Juliet had been a waitress in a half-forgotten corner of Brooklyn. The kind of place where the coffee was too strong, the tips too small, and the regulars too bitter to smile. She had grown up there, not in the cafe, but in the neighborhood behind it. A 2-bedroom apartment that housed 5 people and too many dreams. Her father had been a mechanic until the accident. Her mother worked nights cleaning office buildings. Her younger sister, Lila, had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that required expensive medication not covered by any plan they could afford. Juliet worked 3 jobs at once: day shifts at the cafe, evenings at a call center, and nights tutoring kids whose parents paid in cash under the table. Her life wasn't glamorous. It was survival stitched together with duct tape and sleeplessness. And still, it wasn't enough. Medical bills piled up. Debt collectors called. Her father, once proud and full of laughter, shrank into someone quiet. Her mother cried in secret. Lila smiled less often. It was during one of those nights, walking home with numb fingers and empty pockets, that she saw the ad. It wasn't a billboard or a pop-up, just a discreet flyer tucked between job listings at the community center. Private arrangement, 1-year commitment, discretion required, compensation guaranteed. She had laughed at first. It sounded like something from a bad romance novel or a scam, but something made her take a photo of it. Later that night, curiosity won. She dialed the number. A woman answered. Polite, efficient. She asked no personal questions, only offered a time and place for an interview. Juliet didn't go right away. She spent a week trying to forget about it, but when her mother collapsed from exhaustion and the ambulance cost more than their rent, she showed up. The building was unlike anything she had ever seen, all glass and silence. A woman in a gray suit met her in the lobby and guided her to the top floor. There he was, Adrian Sterling. He didn't stand when she entered, he didn't smile, he just looked at her like she was another figure to calculate. "You're younger than I expected," he said. "And you're colder," she replied. His eyebrow rose slightly. "You're direct." "I'm tired." He studied her. "You read the agreement?" "Yes." "And you understand what it is?" "A marriage in name, appearances, public partnership, no expectation of intimacy, 1 year, 1 payout, no strings after." "And you still came." She met his eyes. "I came because I need the money, but I won't pretend I don't know what this is." He nodded once. "You're not what I expected." "I get that a lot." That night he offered her the contract. She didn't sign it right away. She took it home, read every line, took it to a lawyer, asked questions, refused to be swept up in fantasies or delusions. This was business, a clean exchange. Dignified desperation dressed in designer silk. She signed 3 days later. Adrian was famous in the finance world, CEO of one of the largest private equity firms in New York. He had built his empire from nearly nothing after the early death of his parents. No scandals, no family, no romantic entanglements, only power, perfection, and a reputation for control. But 6 months before Juliet met him, a storm of headlines had erupted around a legal inheritance dispute. A distant relative had contested the legitimacy of Adrian's leadership, claiming his status violated a clause in the family trust that required him to be married by the time he turned 35. He had just turned 34. Publicly, he dismissed it. Privately, he prepared. Juliet was never supposed to be the one. He had interviewed others, women from the circles he trusted, beautiful, educated, polished, but they were too rehearsed, too eager, too dangerous. He needed someone who didn't want to stay, someone who would take the deal and walk away cleanly. Juliet had no desire to belong in his world. That made her perfect. The wedding was arranged in weeks. No love story. Just paperwork and planning. Dress fittings and media control. Her family was flown out discreetly for a small brunch before the ceremony. Lila cried when she saw Juliet in the gown. Her mother said nothing but squeezed her hand tightly. Her father tried to smile. Juliet didn't cry. She had made her choice. She would be the wife of a billionaire for 12 months. She would play her role. She would collect her payment. She would return to her life freer than she had ever been. That was the plan. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that something far more dangerous than love was waiting to unravel that plan. Emotion, and the quiet, terrifying truth that even the coldest hearts can be claimed when they least expect it. The first week after the wedding passed like a strange, sterile dream. Juliet lived in a home most people only saw in magazines. The penthouse stretched across the top 2 floors of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park. Marble floors, a rooftop terrace, private elevator access, a library larger than her entire apartment growing up. But it was quiet, so quiet it hurt. Adrian was never home during the day. When he was, he remained locked in his office or on calls behind closed doors. The housekeeper came at specific hours, groceries were delivered, everything functioned like a machine. No one spoke to her, not even him. At first she didn't mind. It was what she had agreed to. No expectations, no emotional entanglement. She read books in the library, worked on her laptop in the sunroom, even cooked dinner once just for the comfort of routine. He didn't touch the food. After the second week, she tried to break the silence. She left him a note on the kitchen counter. Nothing dramatic. Just a line about needing to review their public event schedule together. He replied via email. Formal, precise, cold. When they attended their first charity gala as a couple, he escorted her like a client. His hand never moved from the small of her back. He introduced her as his wife, smiled when the cameras flashed, then stepped aside the moment the lights dimmed. They danced once. She had to count the seconds just to stay calm. "I hope you know how to act gracious," he murmured in her ear. "I hope you know how to act human," she replied under her breath. His eyes flickered toward her for a second, then he looked away. Juliet learned quickly that her presence was more strategic than personal. Whenever Adrian appeared in public with her, the stock market smiled. Investors liked stability. They liked a powerful man who could appear grounded, domestic, even romantic. Magazines speculated about their surprising whirlwind love. Blogs analyzed every dress she wore, but behind the closed doors of their home, he was a ghost. There was only one person who spoke to her like she mattered. Marcel, the elderly doorman, downstairs, always greeted her by name, always smiled. Once, when he saw her coming back from the grocery store with bags in hand, he gently asked, "Don't they have assistants for that?" She smiled tiredly. "Some things feel better when you do them yourself." "Your heart's too soft for this building," he said kindly. She wanted to laugh. Her heart? She had tucked it away the moment she signed that contract, or so she thought. One evening, Juliet sat on the balcony as a storm rolled across the city. The sky cracked with lightning. She watched the rain fall against the glass, the city glowing beneath it all. Adrian came home late. His tie was loosened, his posture exhausted. He walked past her without a word, but then he paused. "You like storms?" he asked quietly. She turned. "They remind me the world's still alive." He didn't reply, just nodded once and stepped inside. That was the first conversation that hadn't been about logistics. The second came 2 days later. They were seated beside each other at a formal dinner hosted by one of Adrian's oldest investors. The host's wife leaned toward Juliet and said with a sharp smile, "You must have felt so lucky marrying him. Women used to line up for a chance at his attention." Juliet smiled politely. "Then I guess I skipped the line." Adrian glanced at her. For the first time, there was something close to amusement in his eyes. On the ride home, he said, "That was sharp. Would you rather I played dumb?" "I expected you to." She looked at him, tired of the games. "Why did you choose me?" He didn't answer right away. "Because you didn't want me." She stared ahead, heart tight. "You're right, I wanted the money. And I wanted the control." They sat in silence. Then he added, "You make it harder than I thought." Good. The conflict deepened a week later when Juliet received a visit from someone she hadn't seen in months, her ex-boyfriend, Daniel. He showed up at the gallery where she volunteered once a week, claiming he just wanted to see how she was. He had heard about the wedding, of course. Everyone had. "I didn't think you were the gold digger type," he said casually. She stiffened. "You didn't think I was the desperate type either." He laughed. So it's true. You really sold yourself to that Sterling guy? I married him. That's all you need to know. You look the same, he said, eyes narrowing. But there's something different, colder. Maybe I finally learned how to protect myself. She walked away, but Daniel didn't stop there. A week later, she overheard Adrian on the phone in his office. He didn't see her standing outside the door. I don't care what he says. He doesn't know her. I know she wouldn't leak anything. Silence. Yes, I'm sure. More silence, then quietly. Don't dig into her past. That's not part of this. Juliet's heart pounded. He was defending her, but he also expected there might be something to defend against. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she realized the truth. This marriage was no longer a clean contract. It was messy. It was becoming real in all the wrong ways. Adrian didn't trust her, but he wanted to. She didn't love him. But something in her chest cracked every time she saw a piece of his armor fall. They were both trapped in a lie that was becoming harder to keep straight. And soon, someone was going to break. Juliet hadn't planned to care. That had been the whole point. 1 year, no attachment, no vulnerability. But then came the accident. It was late on a Thursday evening. Adrian had canceled dinner plans for the 4th time in 2 weeks. She had long since stopped asking where he was going. Instead, she sat curled on the couch with a book when the phone rang. It was Marcel, the doorman. "Ma'am," he said with an urgency she had never heard in his voice. Mr. Sterling's car was in a minor collision. Nothing serious, but the driver said he hit his head. He refused the hospital. He's on his way back now. Juliet was on her feet before the call ended. When Adrian arrived, he looked dazed but upright. A faint bruise bloomed on his temple. His hair was disheveled, and for once he wasn't wearing his mask of control. She rushed to him without thinking. "Sit down," she ordered, guiding him to the couch. "You need ice and water and someone to knock sense into you." He stared at her, clearly stunned by her sudden proximity. "You're not a nurse. You're not indestructible." She pressed a cold pack against his head. He winced. "Why didn't you go to the hospital?" He exhaled slowly. "I've been to enough hospitals for one lifetime." Juliet didn't press. She just stayed there beside him, holding the ice pack, feeling his warmth so close. It felt unfamiliar, intimate. They didn't speak again that night, but when she stood to leave the room, he reached out. "Stay." She turned. "I don't want to be alone tonight," he said quietly. She sat beside him again, and this time they didn't need words. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise, but something had shifted. He left a note on the counter for the first time. "Thank you." Just that. 2 words. But it meant more than any of the legal documents they had signed. Juliet started noticing small changes after that. Adrian began coming home earlier. He started asking her how her day had gone. He invited her to sit with him while he worked on strategy reports. Once he even asked her opinion on a marketing campaign for one of his foundations. She told him it looked cold and sterile. He smirked. "So, just like me?" "No," she said. "Even your campaign doesn't hide that well." He laughed, and it was real. Their dynamic began to thaw in places she hadn't expected. They attended a charity gala for a children's hospital. When they arrived, she was overwhelmed by the cameras, the noise, the crowd pressing in. He noticed immediately. Without a word, he took her hand and led her outside to the garden. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just not used to all this." He stood with her in silence for a while. "My mother used to bring me to hospitals like this when I was a kid," he said, voice low. "Not because I was sick, because she was." Juliet looked at him gently. "What happened to her?" "She had late-stage lymphoma. Died when I was 11. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "I'm sorry. It taught me to stop depending on things I couldn't control. And now?" He turned to her. "Now I'm trying to learn what it means to depend again." They stayed in the garden until the speeches ended. When they returned, people assumed they had slipped away to be romantic. For the first time, the rumors weren't completely wrong. One night, they cooked dinner together. It started because the chef was sick, and Juliet insisted they didn't need a replacement for one night. Adrian looked skeptical at first, then curious, then strangely invested. He chopped vegetables with military precision while she stirred the sauce. "This is therapeutic," he admitted. "It's called life," she teased. He glanced at her, a rare softness in his features. "You make it easier to remember what that feels like." They ate at the kitchen island. No cameras, no staff, no rules. She laughed when he accidentally spilled wine on his shirt and made him promise to let her teach him how to make pancakes the next morning. He didn't roll his eyes. He smiled. But it wasn't all easy. There were still moments when his guard snapped back up. When she asked him about his childhood, he deflected. When she brought up her sister's health, he offered money instead of comfort. And yet, every time he shut a door, she stayed outside it, not pushing, just present. He began to notice that she didn't want to change him. She just wanted to understand him. That was new. That was dangerous. One evening, he walked into her room, not the guest suite, her real bedroom, and handed her a book. "Thought you'd like this," he said. "It's out of print, but I had a copy restored." She looked at the cover. It was a collection of poems she'd once mentioned loving when she was 17. Her throat tightened. "How did you remember?" "I remember everything you say." She didn't kiss him. She didn't need to. The space between them was already starting to disappear. The final push came unexpectedly. Juliet was helping at a fundraiser in Queens when a child tripped and fell near the refreshments table. Before she could react, Adrian, dressed in full suit and tie, dropped to one knee and gently picked the boy up. "You okay, buddy?" he asked with surprising warmth. The boy nodded, teary-eyed. Adrian handed him a water bottle and helped him find his mother. Juliet watched from across the room. He wasn't putting on a show. He wasn't aware of the cameras. He just acted. She realized in that moment that something inside him had cracked wide open, and he didn't even know it. Later that night, back at the penthouse, she stood by the window, watching the city hum below. He joined her. "You've changed," she said softly. "Or maybe I just stopped hiding." She looked at him, heart full of something she no longer had the strength to deny. "This wasn't supposed to happen." He nodded. "But it did." And then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned in. When his lips touched hers, it wasn't the kiss of a contract or a man fulfilling duty. It was the kiss of someone finally surrendering. To her. To everything. The morning after their first real kiss, Juliet woke to find Adrian already gone. She lay in bed for several minutes, letting the warmth of that moment sink in. For the first time since their wedding, the silence of the penthouse didn't feel heavy. It felt expectant, almost tender. Downstairs, she found a note by the coffee machine in his crisp handwriting. "Meeting in D.C., back by dinner. Don't make pancakes without me." She smiled. It was a small thing, but it meant more than flowers or diamonds. It meant he remembered. It meant he wanted to return. Juliet spent the day walking through Central Park, thinking about how far they'd come. She wasn't naive. She knew their situation had started as a transaction, but somewhere along the way, between quiet nights and guarded truths, something real had taken root, and she had started to believe in it. That belief shattered before sunset. She was in the penthouse library when her phone buzzed. It was Lila. "Jules," her sister said, voice shaking, "you need to see this, right now." "What's wrong?" "I think someone's digging into us." Lila sent a link. It was an article, freshly published on a prominent gossip blog. "From waitress to wife, the gold digger who snared Adrian Sterling." Juliet's stomach turned as she read the opening lines. It detailed her past jobs, her family's debt, even her father's medical records. It painted her as a cunning social climber who had targeted Adrian the moment she learned of his wealth. Her face was splashed across the front page with the caption, "She knew what she wanted and she got it." Juliet's hands trembled as she scrolled. It wasn't just tabloid fluff. Someone had accessed private details, bank information, emails, even texts she had sent Lila months ago. Someone had gone out of their way to destroy her. The final blow came in the last paragraph. Sources close to the couple confirm that the marriage began as a contractual arrangement, a deal worth millions. But what happens when one party falls harder than the other? Juliet's heart pounded. Someone knew. Someone had leaked the truth, and the timing couldn't be worse. When Adrian returned that evening, he was different. His jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed. He didn't greet her, he didn't ask about pancakes. He walked into his office and closed the door. Juliet followed. "Talk to me," she said softly. He didn't look at her. "I don't think that's wise." Her chest tightened. "You read the article." "Of course I did." "And?" "And what? It's true, isn't it?" She stared at him, stunned. "You think I did this?" He looked at her then. Not with the warmth she had come to crave, but with that cold, analytical gaze he wore in boardrooms. "You've had access to everything, emails, my calendar, my schedule. You said you didn't want anything, but maybe that was the smartest lie of all." Juliet stepped back. "You're accusing me of leaking it? You had motive, and you had trust, or so I thought." His voice rose. "I trusted you with my life, Juliet, and now every major outlet is crawling with stories about us. You made me look like a fool." She blinked rapidly, fighting the sting in her eyes. "If you believed even a fraction of what we had, you'd know I'd never do this." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I want to believe you, but I built my entire life by not being stupid twice." Silence fell between them. Then she said, "I should go." He didn't stop her. She packed that night. Not because she was guilty, but because staying in that place, in that silence, would have broken her in ways she couldn't afford. She left the ring on the marble table. No note, no goodbye, just the weight of a heart that had started to heal, and then shattered again. For days, Juliet disappeared. She returned to Brooklyn, to a tiny studio apartment above a florist's shop owned by an old family friend. She went back to simple clothes, quiet mornings, cheap coffee. It should have been comforting. But it wasn't. The pain wasn't about the article, or the accusations. It was about him, because she had loved him. And in the end, love hadn't been enough. What Juliet didn't know was that Adrian didn't sleep for 3 nights after she left. He canceled meetings, ignored calls. He read the article 20 times. He hired a private security team to trace the leak. It took them 4 days. The source was not Juliet. It was Daniel, the same ex-boyfriend who had shown up at her gallery, the same man who had sold private messages and photos for a quick payout. Adrian stood in his office, staring at the final report in his hand. The truth made his stomach churn. She had told the truth. And he had driven her away anyway. The next morning, Adrian stood at the front desk of the florist shop in Brooklyn, dressed not in a suit but in jeans and a sweater. He looked like any man with a broken heart. When Juliet opened the door to see him there, she didn't speak. He held out the article. "I found who did it," he said. "It wasn't you." She folded her arms. "I know. I'm sorry." he whispered. Too late. I know that too. He looked around the tiny apartment, then back at her. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I'm not the man I was when I met you. Juliet's voice cracked. What do you want from me? He took a slow step forward. Nothing, he said, except maybe a chance to try again. No contracts, no press, just us. She didn't move. He stepped back. I'll wait for your answer, however long it takes. And with that, he left, leaving behind something far more vulnerable than wealth or power, his heart. Juliet didn't reply to Adrian's request. Not that day, not the day after, not even the week after. She went about her life quietly. She helped at the florist downstairs when they were near. Iago che amor antir anti ginidi tir, verscourt she malnor anti tir, and nisir stipifi. She made tea at night, sometimes sitting by the window, watching the cities glow from afar. She turned off her phone when the messages started flooding in from unknown numbers and old acquaintances, all wanting a piece of the story. She ignored the press. She ignored the noise, but she couldn't ignore what she still felt. Each morning, her heart betrayed her before her mind caught up. Each time the floor creaked or the door below chimed open, some foolish part of her hoped it might be him again. He didn't return. Until he did. It was nearly 2 weeks later. Rain had just started falling again, soft and rhythmic against the windows. She had lit a candle on the table and was reading when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Adrian standing there, soaked, tired, and holding a paper bag. You're drenched, she said, stunned. I walked. From where? From wherever I lost you. He stepped inside without waiting for her permission. She didn't stop him. He placed the bag on the counter and pulled out 2 containers of takeout from their favorite ramen place, the same one they had ordered from the night they built a pillow fort in the living room, just because she had joked about never having done that as a kid. You remembered, she whispered. I remember everything, he said, especially the moments I wish I could go back and do better. Juliet sat across from him. He didn't reach for her. He didn't try to close the space. He just talked. I thought I had you figured out. I thought the deal would protect me from ever feeling something real. I've spent my entire life building walls so nothing could touch me. Then you walked in and made me feel like a man instead of a machine, and I hated you for it. She didn't interrupt. She let him keep going. I wanted to love you, Juliet, he said, but I didn't know how. So when things got hard, I ran. I defaulted to what I always do: control, accuse, push people away before they can hurt me. You didn't run, she said quietly. You attacked. He looked down. I know. And I've replayed that moment every night since. I've tried to think of what I should have done instead, and the answer is simple. I should have believed you. Silence fell between them. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I know this doesn't fix anything, he said, placing it on the table, but it's not for what you think. She opened the pouch carefully. Inside was the ring, the one she'd left behind, but it wasn't the same. The band had been changed. Engraved inside were 5 words. No contract, just my heart. Juliet stared at it. Adrian, I don't want a second year. I don't want a loophole or a clause. I want you. I want real. She covered her mouth with one hand, overwhelmed. He rose, stepped around the table, and knelt before her. You can say no. I'll respect it. But I needed you to know that the man who once thought love was weakness is now begging for a chance to prove it's the only strength that matters. Juliet looked down at him, this man who had once terrified her with his power and now moved her with his humility. She cupped his face gently. You broke my heart, she whispered. I know. You didn't trust me. I didn't trust myself. And now, he leaned into her palm. Now I trust that nothing in this world matters more than holding your hand every morning and knowing you're not here because you have to be, but because you want to. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Then stop kneeling like you're still trying to earn your place. You already have it. He stood and wrapped her in his arms. They didn't kiss right away. They just held each other, letting every broken piece stitch itself together in the quiet safety they had finally found. The next morning, Juliet returned to the penthouse not as a contract, not as a guest, but as a partner. She walked through the marble foyer with bare feet, her laughter echoing off the walls. Adrian followed behind her with 2 mugs of coffee, smiling like he'd won the lottery and hadn't told anyone yet. They redecorated the bedroom. They cooked together, even though Adrian still burned toast. She planted succulents on the windowsill. He wrote notes and tucked them into her books when she wasn't looking. No tabloids followed them anymore. The press had moved on to some new scandal. But inside the world they built, they didn't need headlines. They had something better. Each other. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Adrian pulled her close on the rooftop terrace. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "The contract?" He nodded. She shook her head. "It brought me here. It gave me you, and it taught me the difference between being bought and being chosen." He kissed her, then slow, certain, and full of all the words they no longer needed to say. Because the woman who had once married him for money now had something far more valuable. His love, his trust, his heart, forever. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the window still held on to the glistening trails it left behind. The city lights blinked beneath a violet sky, softened by the clouds that hadn't quite finished their retreat. Inside the penthouse, the world was warm. Juliet sat cross-legged on the floor of the library, surrounded by open books and half-drunk tea. She was wearing one of Adrian's sweaters, sleeves rolled twice over her hands, her hair pulled into a loose bun. She didn't look like the woman who once wore designer gowns to galas or walked red carpets with a forced smile. She looked like herself. Adrian stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, just watching her. He had spent years calculating risk, reading markets, manipulating outcomes. But no spreadsheet, no prediction, no algorithm could have prepared him for the moment he fell in love with his own wife. The real version of her. Not the one his lawyers had selected, not the woman he had believed he could control, but the one who refused to let him stay broken. He stepped forward, took her hand, and pulled her gently to her feet. "I have something to show you," he said. Juliet raised an eyebrow. "If it's another watch, I'm going to pretend to be excited and secretly re-gift it to your assistant." He smiled. "No watches, I promise." He led her to his office. The room had changed. The towering shelves that once held only ledgers and legal volumes now held photographs, small framed prints of sunsets, old Polaroids of her laughing, postcards she had written to herself but never mailed. And in the center of the wall was a new painting, a watercolor piece, soft and bright, of 2 hands reaching for each other across a quiet table. The day they had ramen together again, the night he returned to her after the storm of his own fear. "You had this made?" she asked. He nodded. "I told the artist to paint the moment I realized I didn't care what I stood to lose anymore. I only cared about who I might never get back." Juliet touched the edge of the canvas, her fingers trembling. "I love you," he said simply. "I know you know it, but I want you to hear it. Every day. For the rest of our lives." She turned to him, eyes shimmering. "I never needed the money," she whispered. "I needed to feel like I was worth being chosen." He took her face in his hands. "You were never a transaction. You were the moment everything changed." And this time, when they kissed, it wasn't about healing old wounds. It was about building something that could never be broken again. Months passed, the headlines faded, their names weren't whispered at parties anymore, but their love grew in quiet, steady ways. Every Sunday they walked the market together, hands full of tulips and fresh bread. Every evening they played one song before dinner and danced, no matter how tired they were. Every year, on the anniversary of their contract, they left their phones off and went somewhere new, not to escape the world, but to remind themselves what they had created from it. One day, on a beach in Sicily, Juliet stood watching the waves crash, her toes buried in the sand. Adrian came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and whispered, "Did you ever think we'd get here?" She leaned into him. "I never thought you'd kiss me like I mattered." He smiled against her hair. "You matter more than everything I built." She turned to face him. "And to think," she said, brushing a kiss against his lips, "I married you for the money." He laughed softly. "And I married you for convenience." They kissed again, longer, truer, the kind of kiss that makes people believe in second chances, in love after fear, in choosing each other even when the world doesn't understand why. And so they stayed there, wrapped in each other, while the sun sank into the sea, no longer a billionaire and the girl who took his deal, but two people, deeply and finally in love.